Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our event this morning. My name's David Carney. I'm the Executive Director of the Career Industry Council of Australia. For those of you that are joining us in Australia, it's a very good morning. If you're joining us from other parts of the world, welcome to whatever time zone you're in. And if you're joining us as a recording, watching this afterwards, we hope you enjoy the session. Before we get underway today, I'd just like to make an acknowledgement of country. So the Career Industry Council of Australia would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their deep connection to land, sea and community. I'd like to acknowledge that this morning I'm hosting this webinar on the lands of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us in the session this morning. Just a little bit of quick housekeeping, just to let you know that this session is being recorded. If you experience any technical issues over the course of the next hour, we'd ask you just in the first instance to try refreshing your screen. If that doesn't work, you can actually log out of the session and come back in with the link that you have been provided. We will have the chat function open today, so feel free to contribute your comments and thoughts into the chat. As always, we've asked our presenters, James and Carly, to focus on their presentation, so they probably won't be keeping an eye on the chat, but feel free to add sort of any comments that you might have to what they're discussing. If you have any specific questions for James or Carly, if there is time at the end of the session, we'll endeavour to have those questions answered for you. This is the second of our 4 webinars as part of our Empowering Futures month. 2 more webinars to go next Wednesday the 19th and then Wednesday the 26th. If you're interested in either of those 2 sessions, please feel free to either use the QR code or visit the Seeker website, click on the events page, and you will be able to be taken through to the ticketing page. So that's enough for the housekeeping. It gives me an opportunity now to welcome both James and Carly to the Empowering Futures series. So James Sinclair is an Assistant Professor of Special Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction within the College of Education and Health Professions at the University of Arkansas. A central focus of his research efforts is to expand access to space and context for individuals with disabilities and shifting environments to be more accessible and inclusive of individuals with disabilities. And James is joined by his colleague this morning, Carly Gilson, who's an Associate Professor of Special Education in the Department of Educational Studies at Ohio State University. Her research interests centre on equipping adolescents and young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities for integrated employment and inclusive higher education. So welcome both James and Carly, and I'm going to throw to James to kick us off today. Thanks, James.
Great. Thank you so much for having us here. We are thrilled to be here. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully that will make everybody see what I'm seeing. Just really, really grateful for this opportunity. Today we're talking about promoting dignity of work for people with disabilities. And this is something that has evolved. Dr. Gilson and I have worked over multiple years around looking at employment for individuals with specifically intellectual disabilities, and really seeing how do we have this conversation? How do we make this more and more relevant? How do we make this more practical? And so we hope to share some of what we've been doing over this next hour in our presentation.
So James, sorry, just before you go on, I think you're in a slide view at your end, not presentation mode.
Oh shoot. How's that?
That's it. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. COVID still did not teach me well enough. So just to give you some context about where we are, if you're unfamiliar with the United States, this is kind of where Dr. Gilson and I are positioned. So as David said, I'm at the University of Arkansas, which is considered the southeast quadrant of the US. I focus on special education, the transition to adulthood for students with disabilities. Some of my other work is around equity practices and transition and school-based mental health services. And I will let Dr. Gilson share a little bit more about herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Good morning to those of you who are in morning. I am Carly Gilson, and I am located in Columbus, Ohio, which is in the Midwest part of the United States. And I'm at Ohio State University, an associate professor of special education, as David said. And my research interests also focus on the transition to adulthood for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities and inclusive higher education opportunities, such as the inclusive post-secondary programs that you may be familiar with, an organization called Think College, which is a broad network of inclusive programs across the United States. So I do a lot of work with those types of programs, as well as supporting teachers in transition settings and secondary settings to prepare their students for adulthood.
So one of the things that we wanted to do was to create multiple opportunities for engagement throughout this kind of our presentation. And so one of the first things that we would like is just to kind of ask who's here, who's with us today, and that's in our first poll. These are some of the categories that we got from David when we asked about who our audience was. So we would love for some of your participation now. All right. This is exciting. So we have a lot of those who I kind of identify within career development and education. I really think that you'll be resonating with the things that we talk about today. We will also be talking kind of from that employer management side just a little bit in those considerations. So I hope that some of the language that we use maybe can help those that are working in the education field really expand and connect with those who are in the employment field as well. So thank you for our first participation. We appreciate it, and we will move on. So our agenda today really is talking about what is our objective. Our objective is dignity of work. Who's our population of focus? Our population is individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, really providing you some frameworks of how Dr. Gilson and I talk about and think about employment for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, give us some language and some an approach to that, and then kind of circling back and hopefully have a full circle moment around dignity of work in practice, right? What does that look like through the models that we are going to talk about? So I'm going to start us off with what is our objective? For all of us, it doesn't matter with a disability or not, who we are, when we're in an employment setting, our objective really is dignity of work. And that's defined as the feelings of being recognized, acknowledged, included, and respected for who we are, or who we are and what we know. And something that really resonates with me here is some of those things are really operationally observable, right? Being recognized and acknowledged, finding a way for inclusion, being respected. So I like this visual of a tree where we're recognizing this tree and what they do, this elder tree and what it does for its ecosystem. We acknowledge what it provides, right? We respect it because of that. It's included through its massive root structures, right? Its deep impact into the environment. And so when we think about that, we kind of want to think about that as well with who we are and what we provide into an employment setting. And so just to kind of give you an example of this, I recently moved from a position of a research associate at a university, and now I'm in a tenure track position. And I often did the same type of work that I do now, but because I was not a tenured faculty member, I didn't have the same feelings of being recognized and acknowledged as other faculty in that university. And so making this move to a tenure track faculty member, it's very interesting that the power dynamics, the acknowledgement that you get because of the position that you're in. And so this also kind of is going to resonate when we talk about some of our frameworks around upward mobility and understanding where we are in context with our employment setting. And so thinking about this is, what's observable, but also those feelings of being recognized and acknowledged as well. So that's our outcome, and we will circle back to it in just a little bit. But
all right, so I'm going to break down that definition of dignity of work a little bit more using a taxonomy that was developed by Donna Hicks in the book that was shared about the elements of dignity, where that definition that Dr. Sinclair just shared came from. And what we did in a recent study was we tried to apply these existing elements of the dignity of work specifically to the people who have extensive support needs, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, who I'll talk a little bit more about. But this is what you're looking at. These are different components of what comprises the dignity of work. So I'll read through a couple of them and give you an opportunity to read them on your own as well. So on the left side is the name of the component, and the right side is the definition of that. So the first is acceptance of identity. When we approach individuals, and this could be any individual with or without a disability, as equals in the workplace, classroom, or community setting, and give them freedom to express their authentic selves without fear of being judged. And I think that anecdote that Dr. Sinclair just shared about moving from a research associate position where he was doing much of the same things that a tenure track faculty was doing, he may not have received that acceptance of identity in that particular role until he had a different line in his email signature that said that he was indeed a professor, even though the day-to-day work looked very, very similar. So I could see where there may have been a lapse of dignity in that particular area. Some other really components include inclusion, and that's probably not surprising that, and when we talk about inclusion in this context, we're talking specifically about creating a workspace where all people feel more than just physically included, but they also feel a deeper sense of belonging in the workplace, where they feel like, I always think of belonging as when you're not there, somebody misses you and somebody notices that you're absent. And so I think if we can apply that definition here of really feeling like the work you do every day is valuable, the work you do is acknowledged, and that you are seen as a really positive contributor to the workplace, and that you are missed if or when you are gone. It also refers to safety at a physical and psychological level, safety in the sense where people feel like they can communicate openly with one another. They feel that their comments and feelings and opinions are acknowledged. So this that means that people are taking time to validate what they're saying, and that they feel the ability to say whatever is on their mind. And recognition. This comes from more of a performance base. When good work is being done, it's recognized, whether it's through praise or appreciation, maybe through higher compensation or a bonus. And we're working in a space where we can all build off one another's unique strengths and recognize that. And then the next slide. And this is the next set of those components of dignity of work. The next being fairness. And this is related to having rules in place that ensure that everyone adheres to the same guidelines, meaning that there aren't special rules for different subsets of people, but that there is an employee handbook or employee expectations, and everybody is set to follow those. This also may include the benefit of the doubt, which is a phrase that's often applied to just assume the best intentions in people. Assume that even when mistakes are made or there's slip ups, that we're all trying our best, and that those consequences aren't reprimanded too harshly because likely it was just a mistake if something goes wrong. And understanding the way that Hicks conceptualizes this is related to conflicts. When there are disagreements, that each person has their chance to conceptualize and explain their point of view, rather than only hearing one side of the story or making assumptions. And independence relates to promoting autonomy in the workplace so that each employee feels like they can do what they need to do, that they are in control of their own decisions related to work. And then lastly is accountability. And again, this is often framed within a conflict situation, that when there is a wrongdoing that's been acknowledged, that that party accepts responsibility for their actions. And so this component of dignity is about holding yourself accountable as well as holding others accountable for mistakes that they've made. So now we're going to move into another poll and ask you to reflect on these components of dignity that I've just shared in relation to your own sense of dignity at work. And so we'd like you to select 3. You don't have to rank order them. You could just check all that apply, check 3 that really resonate with you. As I was just sharing the definitions, which were the ones that were, you went, aha, in your mind, like that sounds like something that I really can resonate with when I feel dignity at work. So we'll give you about 30 seconds to complete that now. Okay, so this is really interesting. We've got a really interesting spread here across all of these. I'm seeing independence is rising to the top alongside inclusion, acceptance of identity, acknowledgement. And those are some things that may be, why you pursued a certain job, why you stay in the job when things get hard. I see somebody said, I just saw this pop up in the chat, I would have liked to add a sense of belonging, maybe as its own component of dignity. Yeah, I think that could be really important because it's tied to inclusion, but I think that inclusion is such a broad term that can mean so many different things, that it might be useful to carve out sense of belonging for its own. Great. Well, this is very interesting, and I hope you'll continue to keep this in your back pocket as we move forward. We're going to give you a few more opportunities later to reflect on this. So when we talk about dignity, we have heard this term recently, dignity of work, a lot. And maybe it's in the field of vocational psychology. And oftentimes, though, there is a subset of the population that's missing from the conversation surrounding dignity. And probably not by surprise, based on the topic of our talk today, that is people with disabilities, and specifically people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that is a more narrow subset of the broader population of people with disabilities. So we want to just make sure that we're all on the same page with the terminology that we're using when we refer to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or sometimes we might say IDD. And these definitions that you're seeing here come from the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, related to each intellectual and developmental disabilities. So when we refer to people with intellectual disability, we are describing a person who has a condition that is marked by significant limitations in both intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. Oftentimes, intellectual disability is just tied to IQ or cognitive ability, but that secondary piece around adaptive behavior, which may include either activities of daily living, such as related to self-care, related to decision-making, related to how they social skills and how they respond in unfamiliar situations. Those all might be grouped under that adaptive behavior. And then Developmental disability, sometimes could be referring to people who have co-occurring intellectual and developmental disabilities, or sometimes this is separate. So developmental disabilities is a broader umbrella over which ID sort of fits in. That would be a severe chronic disability that comes from some kind of mental or physical impairment that usually originates in very early life before the age of 22. So autism falls into this, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome. These are some common diagnoses that are grouped in these terms. So now we'll share some landscape of what these employment gaps look like. And when we describe the missing piece of dignity, why this may be, and how this really shows up in our employment data. And we'll talk about the US first and then Australia. So based on a national longitudinal transition survey that followed a cohort, very large group of adolescents with different types of disabilities, we know that individuals with intellectual disabilities are more likely to grow up in socioeconomically disadvantaged homes and live lives in poverty or along the poverty line. Individuals with disabilities as a whole are likely than their counterparts without disabilities to either be unemployed or underemployed, which means they are working below their pay level, sometimes below minimum wage, and tend to be very limited and confined to entry-level jobs that do not offer room for advancement. So based on some recent data from the United States, less than a quarter of people with a disability are employed, and just over a quarter of people with disabilities who were employed had a cognitive disability. So of this pretty small group of people who are employed, it's a relatively small ratio of that indeed have a cognitive disability. So for the average person with IDD, it tends to be very unlikely that they would be able to move into employment after exiting high school. And this is some information specific to Australia, which again may use different terms. This is may or may not refer to the same group of people. So just under half of working age people with disability are employed, compared to about 79% of the population without disabilities. And when we break this down by gender, 23% of men with a severe or profound disability are employed, and even less for women, about 20%. And what we know of these comparisons, and really, like, no matter how you're stacking the data, this information should be unsettling, and it should ask you, why is that? What's missing, and what can we do to make the difference? So now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Sinclair to talk through some frameworks.
Setting up the context for what we want to get at, our objective being, again, dignity of work for our individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Two kind of frameworks really drive how Dr. Gilson and I really approach this, and what we might suggest thinking about maybe a different way of thinking how to look at employment for individuals with disabilities. So psychology of working theory is one, and the ecological systems framework is another. And so through this presentation, we'll kind of integrate both of these together and talk about why this is meaningful for individuals with ADD. So psychology of working theory, excuse me, really kind of gives us some understanding about how people make meaning of work. So in many cases, when you introduce somebody to somebody new, a lot of times that first question is, oh, what do you do, right? And so a lot of times what we do becomes who we are and part of our identity. And from that, we actually can almost stereotype what this person is, what do they do, what status they are in the world around them or society. And so psychology of working theory does kind of take that into play, but really understands, well, how do we make meaning, and why do we make meaning from the employment that we're in? And it really focuses in on three things that it provides, and that is, it's a means of power and survival, connection to others, and a means of self-determination. And so what we mean by power and survival is this idea that work and employment is transactional, right? We kind of have to be employed. Most of us have to be employed, and from that we get a paycheck. And through that paycheck, we are able to survive. It gives us an opportunity to pay our rent. It gives us an opportunity to pay for our groceries and our food. So we actually are able to keep sustaining life day after day. In addition to that, it gives us some type of power through social capital, power through the idea that whatever job I have, it's part of my identity, but it also allows me to potentially have upward mobility in my employment setting. And so if I continue to have that upward mobility, I continue to gain more and more power, right? Those power dynamics that I was even talking about just from a pretty lateral move from a research associate to a tenured faculty position. In addition, it provides us a sense of social connection, right? It gives us a place to go. It gives us relationships to build. It gives us a meaning to have reliance on others. So when we talk about inclusion, as Carly was saying, that social belonging, that idea that somebody misses you, not only for the work that they do as a partner, but also the character that they are, what they provide in terms of having a wonderful culture in the workplace. Those types of things are really critical, and we find meaning in those interactions. Lastly, we find meaning through self-determination. We saw that independence being really important. Work does allow us to have this sense of autonomy. Or we hope that it does, because we want to achieve, we want to be independent. But on the flip side, we also want to be recognized and respected for the things that we do, right? That's those dignity constructs that we're talking about. So psychology of working theory really allows us to kind of understand employment through the individual lens, and we'll talk through ecological systems framework through more of a systems lens later on. But when we think about psychology of working theory and we think about employment, usually what we think about is employment is a dual relationship. It's a dynamic relationship between the employer and the individual, right? The employer puts out a position, they need somebody to do XYZ tasks, and somebody applies for that. And so there is that really strong dynamic relationship to say, hey, I could do this, you need somebody to do this, hire me. But in addition, it's not just that the employer is looking for somebody to fill those holes, but a lot of times the individual is looking for a place where social connection happens, upward mobility happens, the idea of independence and autonomy and growth and skill building through competence building, right? Those are the things that an individual is looking for in an employer. And so we have this kind of interesting dynamics between employer and the employee. What's unfortunate, and this happens not everywhere, but a lot of times within the United States, and I would suggest elsewhere, excuse me, is that when it comes to an individual with a disability, and a lot of times with intellectual and developmental disabilities, for some reason, we start to think that that relationship is not dynamic. It's not a two-way street. For whatever reason, we start to think, oh, isn't it great? Somebody's employing this individual. And then it becomes that an employer is doing something for somebody, not necessarily saying, hey, what can this person do for us? How can we bring in this individual and be able to say, they have value, we're going to bring them in, and that dynamic relationship is going to then increase. And so what we see is through these misconceptions, right, through these biases, we see that this relationship isn't actually what's going on. We're seeing that because the employer then is inflexible, not creative in understanding what the strengths are of the person. And so then we have to kind of start to question here, right? What are we doing, and from whom are we asking things to be done, right? And so Carly and I, Dr. Gilson and I, we talk a lot about the paradigm shift, right? And so what's our thinking, right? Psychology of working theory really does allow us to look at the individual and how they make meaning from the work, but to what degree are we constantly talking about the individual, right? How much more time do we need to say to an individual that they need to advocate for themselves? How much more time do we need to say, no, you need to take more training, you need to show and demonstrate your skill sets, right? How much more times do we have to say that for the individual? And why is it necessarily always up to the individual to really advocate to say, I need a place for upward mobility. I need a place where I could survive, where I'm not being paid less than minimum wage, right? Where the social connection is part of the strength that I bring in because of who I am. And so then we have to kind of look at, okay, well, can we advocate for the employer to create spaces, right? This is where the systems change starts to come into play as we talk about management, we talk about employer options, is really, can the employee or the employer create spaces where every individual has a place for self-determination and autonomy and independence, where we pay everybody a living wage because of what they bring in value, right? Really see the individual strengths of a person, and then always create opportunities for growth and leadership, right? And so it might not be on the same trajectory as we assume everybody will be on, but if we don't have that, then we're really, again, kind of going back and diminishing that dynamic relationship in which a healthy employee-employer relationship is founded on. And so Dr. Gilson's going to talk next about a research project that we did that was looking at this specifically.
Yeah, thank you. And I saw a lot of emojis coming in that were affirming, I think, what you were just sharing, Dr. Sinclair. So I think it's resonating. And perhaps, in Australia and the parts of the world where you may be, you're seeing similar patterns emerge where there is that different dynamic of relationship that seems to be applied to people with disabilities. So the purpose of the study that we completed was to determine whether or not the PWT, which is the psychology of working theory that we just discussed, applies and fits within the lived experiences of adults with IDD. And we also wanted to know, so basically we wanted to look at that existing taxonomy, the three pillars that we just shared: power and survival, social connection, and self-determination. See, well, are those the same for people with IDD? We don't want to make the assumption that it is, because there hasn't been research that's looked specifically at that population. And then more broadly, we also wanted to know, what are the work experiences? Like, how do adults with IDD find meaning and fulfillment from their work experiences? So we set out to conduct a study that captured a diverse range of perspectives from people all around the United States who have a variety of job experiences. So this was 18 people total, and it was a qualitative study, which means we primarily used interviews with virtual interviews with 18 young adults with IDD from different regions. And they had a mixed background in terms of their education. Most had graduated from high school, and some had additional college or post-secondary type of experience. And then they came from a wide variety of workplace environments, including food service, office and clerical positions, janitorial, public service, animal service. And then there were several people who were recently unemployed, but the purpose of this study was to ask them about their work experience. So they all had been employed within the last 6 months and had those experiences to draw from. And what we found largely was that the definitions that Dr. Sinclair just shared largely did apply to this population. And that's probably not anything too surprising. But what I think was interesting and really compelling was that not only did those same types of components apply, but they were actually sort of enriched through these perspectives, meaning that so David Bluestein, who was the one of the founding authors of the Psychology of Working framework, was on this study, and um, he served as an auditor. After we conducted the interviews and coded for the interviews, he reviewed them and made several comments about the ways that the definitions were enriched. And one of them is related to survival and power. So what we share here is the definition that comes specifically from our findings. And then on the right side is a quote from one of our participants that really exemplifies what that definition is all about. So I won't read them all in the interest of time, but I'll just read one from each slide and then allow you a moment to read on your own as well. But the one that I really want to read is from this slide, is related to social recognition and mobility, because I think it's not too surprising probably that work provides a sense of independence and daily living, as it does for anybody who has a job, because it provides a paycheck, which has a very tangible outcome in our lives that we're able to provide for our family and access things. But related to social recognition and mobility, this showed up to be similar to the traditional definition of survival and power, but also have that additive component related to proving abilities and self-worth, where work provides a sense of, provides an opportunity for people with disabilities to prove that they are worth something, that they have value in society. And I think this quote from Michael really says it better than I can, where he said, just keep fighting and don't let the boss say, no, you can't do it. Just tell them you can and let them give you a chance to show that you can. So that, like, going up against that adversity time and time again and having to continuously prove oneself that, like, I am capable, I can do this. Please, lift your expectations so that I can prove myself. And that having employment is a way for people with IDD to do that in society. The next one was related to social connection. And within these, we saw that individuals derive social connection directly through their workplace. So, just as many of us probably have friends that we know through work. And then oftentimes that, goes outside of the workplace. That was an important one. So it might provide just interpersonal opportunities of just having small talk, basic conversation with one another, but then also the ability to form those deeper relationships that may go outside of work. And something that was specific to our population or our participant sample with IDD was that they also described how work offers a community of support. So people who could help in challenging them to learn new things and assisting with work tasks and I think this is true for all of us, probably, that we learn things from others. We may have a mentor at work who helps us. We may, if we make a mistake, have somebody who shows us how to do something. And then lastly, work provides a way to expand our own social networks, which may give us an opportunity to get future jobs. Maybe somebody you could list as a reference when you apply for a job, or you know someone who knows someone, and that gets you another opportunity. So it also expands your network beyond the immediate people that you work with. Okay, now you can go. And the last one was self-determination. And this one had a lot of the same components emphasized, but one of the new ones, and this is the only one I'll read from here, is the first one, the authentic motivation. Many of our participants, all of our participants, in fact, talked about just having this authentic drive to work. And I love this quote from Erica, who exemplifies that. I'm excited on Sunday night. It's like, yay, I'm excited for work. I get up and do my normal routine and get ready for work, and my body is excited to get out and work. Just that really pure joy and passion to love what she does, I think, is really inspiring, and something we saw, again, just like such a deep appreciation to have a job and to be able to contribute to society in that unique way. And now we're going to do another poll where, similar to the dignity one, we're going to ask you to reflect on the constructs of PWT that we just shared, and ask you to choose one. I think, David, I think it might be another poll the one about PWT. I'm seeing the one about level of involvement. Do we have the one?
I think it might be the next one. I may have forgotten to pull up.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It'd be poll number 4, David, if you're able to do that one, or question 4. Sorry about that.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, so just quickly, just pick one that that you believe really contributes most to dignity. Tying it back to dignity, which one do you think provides that avenue? Right, yeah, self-determination, and then social connection, power and survival. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, this is just a path for future research for us to really connect these dots, because I think there's a lot of different ways that we can look at dignity depending on which domain we're focusing on. But as you can see, there are really close connections with each of these.
So to kind of continue this conversation and expand, again, thinking about, we have this approach around psychology of working theory. It helps us understand how we make meaning. And within the United States, a lot of times in transition, so much of what we do is say, hey, you're through high school. We need to write a goal about you getting employed. Did you get employed? Yes, great. Our hands are done. And there's really no follow-up. There's no understanding about how we make meaning. We might just say, we need to get you placed somewhere so you have a job. And it's the only place really where somebody's making this decision with you or for you. It's kind of, gray matter. And, if somebody's just saying, hey, go get a job at the local grocery store, and that's not really something that you want to do, you're not going to have meaning in that, right? You're not going to really think about, staying there, retaining upward mobility, because you don't have that psychology of working, those components in that, because you're not making meaning of your work. And so again, thinking about how do we change our perspective of what employment means, and how we interact with our environment. And so so we wanted to bring in the psychology of working theory in this discussion, but also tie it into ecological systems framework, where it really does allow us to inspect how an individual interacts with the environment more discriminately, right? It gives us an opportunity to look at identities. So not only the disabled identity, but other identities, the systems in which we interact, society as a whole, who is privileged, who is not privileged, and really kind of look at things through an equitable framework and mindset. And so, so when we think about employment, when we think about ourselves as we navigate going into employment, we have to think about our microsystem, which is kind of the most immediate, our identities, our affiliations, whether it's religious, whether it be a professional organization, whether it be a community, a practice that we're part of, our social networks. We have to start thinking about what is it that we identify, what is privileged, what is not. Our mesosystems, these are kind of our more immediate interactions with our peers, maybe our schooling that we are part of, some of those immediate environments that we interact with often, right? And so in those immediate environments, are some identities privileged or not? Do we hold multiple marginalized identities, and how does our environments interact with that? And when we go out even further and we're part of and interacting with our systems, right? Do we have access to the best practices? Are our schools promoting, research-based, evidence-based practices? Do we have quality access to care, whether it be healthcare, education, employment, right? What are those opportunities, and how does that interact with our identities? And then where are we situated on a macro system scale of Where are we societally, politically, physically, ideologically, right? What in that, as we're interacting with our larger macro systems, do we even have opportunities within that because of the identities we hold, right? So we're thinking about ecological theory in the sense of we have to understand where we are in context and how our identities play within that. And so Bronfenbrenner, the developer of this theory, really talks about it posits that an individual's development is influenced by a series of interconnected environmental systems ranging from the immediate surroundings, right, our family, to broad societal structures. And so kind of just being a little bit more concise than what I was in the previous slide. And this is not his equation, this is my equation, but really looking at the individual times community and then times the systems really allows for us to think about our outcomes. And so when we think about marginalized identities, right, let's say LGBTQ identities, if we hold one of those in the United States, there are 29 states that you could be fired for being gay and holding that identity without any issue, right? There's no necessarily a law that protects those individuals in that private sector. Disability, right? If you hold a disability identity, maybe there's issues with access to diverse work experiences because people have put limitations on you. If you're in a rural setting, maybe you have less access to high quality healthcare, transportation, a vast diverse option for employment options. So we have to start thinking about that in terms of how we interact with our systems. And so again, kind of repeating myself a little bit, but at the macro level for our students or our people is what policies are in place. So not only what policies are in place, but what policies do I as a disabled individual have to interact with, right? How do I have to continue to advocate for myself by instigating and being a protagonist across these policies that might not be super accessible for myself, right? Are things universally designed, right? Do I have access to building? Do I have access to resources? Do I have access to technology? Are they available to me? When it comes to those meso systems, what supports are available to me to grow? And then the micro system of who supports me is my family is there, the schools, my peers, my co-workers, are they around? So really thinking about this and the opportunities that these systems provide depending on who you are. So one thing that Carly and I wanted to talk about also was, again, we think about the individual a lot, but we don't necessarily think about business a lot. And we think about business and they themselves are interacting within its own ecological systems. And this is why we have to kind of identify and be able to talk to them in a way, understanding that there's a lot of interactions that are happening on them as well, including macro, exo, meso systems as well, right? So does a business have to comply to non-discrimination policies? Are they actually enacting those? Right? Does our community, does society itself uplift individuals with disabilities? Do they value them or not? Right? On a smaller scale, what supports are there? Is there a focus on culture and well-being, that inclusion piece of dignity? Is there a culture of the employer, right? So do they uphold what the policies are at play? What benefits are provided to employees? Instead of saying, like, one of my favorite things is my partner is a nurse, and on Nurse Appreciation Day, they say go to the used or the leftover swag office where old sweatshirts you could just take as an appreciation of a nurse. And I'm like, that doesn't give you an appreciation. That doesn't show you dignity. What shows you dignity is better benefits, better hours, better protections as an employee. So, So again, where are we in the business, and understanding that businesses also have these systems at play? And are we enacting natural supports? Sometimes an individual with a disability or not just needs a little extra somebody to say, hey, this is how you do it. This is what we need to do. That's a natural support, easy, accessible, moving forward, right? Does leadership advocate for persons with disabilities? So thinking about that and understanding that ecological systems are at play how an individual interacts with their environment, but also how an employer interacts with their space and the employees. Again, where is the weight of expectations in navigating these systems? Do we continue to say the individual is the person, or do we say you are a massive organization, you are a company, you are a small mom and pop? Through minor changes, you can make something accessible. You can provide opportunities, and we can change misconceptions, and we can actually value added to your company because this person has these strengths and these skill sets. So we're going to kind of close out a little bit here, just navigating the looking at the dignity of work and what does it look like across macro, trying to tie it all together for you. So really thinking about at the macro level, we're accepting and celebrating each employee's unique identity. We're promoting a culture of inclusion in the workplace, and we're treating all employees fairly and justly. And one thing that Dr. Gilson talked about earlier, but it's so critical, this is like our teacher hat coming along, is consistency of enforcement. As they say, with great power comes great responsibility. We have to hold all employees accountable, right? We have to uphold saying, this is our culture of accessibility, this is our culture of inclusion, and we have to make sure that those policies are upheld, right? Assure safety physically and mentally, hold employees accountable for their actions. This is kind of more of those meso systems, not the macro systems. But again, are environments accessible? Are we actively making sure that we're taking care of all of our employees to make sure that every space is accessible? Like I said, whether it be physical space, inclusion of mind, or even resources or technology, right? I also think that we have to uphold and make sure that we have high expectations for our executives and the managers, those who are leading companies, to set expectations, disseminate and model those expectations, consistently provide positive reinforcement. Because that's the other thing, is that we think about accountability as a negative thing, but if we know anything, positive reinforcement is so critical for the continuous behavior that we want to see. So that has to be part of it, is recognizing those positive behaviors, the behaviors that we want to see in a company that are inclusive for students or individuals with disabilities. And then lastly, at the microsystem, this is what we could do for individuals with disabilities, is recognizing the achievements and contribution of each employee. So we have to make sure that we're recognizing and acknowledging, encourage that independence and self-determination. So again, what are our knowing that we're going to hire them for something because we needed that transactional piece, but what is their upward mobility? How are we going to ensure that they are going to be able to provide and grow in this company? And acknowledge and then listen. We have to be able to take the time to say, I just need to listen to what you need, right? I need to listen, and I need to care for the accommodations that you need so you can be successful. And that's, we talk a lot about that here, especially in our day and age of the United States, is saying, hey, with a little accommodation, you're going to be able to provide my company more. We're going to be better as a company. And that's so critical for us because you are value added. So we wanted to, we have one more poll, but one thing that we thought was going to be really critical for us is to share with you some quotes from our participants about job advice. So we asked at the end of our interviews with them to say, hey, what would you advise other individuals? And we quoted we quoted this percentage of only 25% of individuals with IDD are employed. So what advice would you give others seeking employment? And so from Jason, he says, life is going to hit you like a boxer. And then every time you get knocked down, you got to make sure you are that person that gets up, right? It's that intention of employment. When Dr. Gilson was talking about that authentic motivation, that idea of, no, there's power and survival in me being an employee, and I'm going to keep going and drive, right? And so sometimes you don't see that drive in people without disabilities, right? And recognizing that people with disabilities want to work, they're committed to work, and they're going to be a value added, right? Get off the couch and get jobs, because jobs are very important to people with disabilities. Not everyone knows about disabilities, so we need to get out there and show them that we could do stuff. That was Beth. again, challenging misconceptions, being able to be identified, seen as a value person in an employer is critical. And then just keep fighting. Don't let the boss say, no, you can't do it. Just tell them you can and let them give you a chance to show them that you can. Was that the same quote as before? Maybe it was, but the same thing is it's fine to reiterate because we have to keep showing that we can, right? We can't stop with the I can't. And then this is our last little poll for you. This is our last slide, but one thing that we would like to think about is, okay, so you identified dignity of work for yourself. When working with people with disabilities, which 3 dignity constructs will you prioritize to support successful employment outcomes? So thinking about, I'm going to target this. When I'm working with my students, with my employees, I want to make sure that when they get placed in an employment setting, they have these 3. That's what's most important for me. So that's our last poll for today. Oh, I love it. Inclusion, staying at the top, really that idea of belongingness really resonating with you. I love that. Acceptance of identity, how wonderful to see that, right? Idea of, hey, disability is not a bad thing, right? Who I am, what I bring is valuable. I'm going to show you I could do it. Really critical. Independence still being there. So we Dr. Gilson and I are just so grateful that you all took the opportunity, the time to be here with us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate it. David, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Carly. Great presentation. I think it's always important that we, shine a spotlight on this really important area. And I think you did a great job of doing that today. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. I don't know if you can see those or who wants to answer them. I think there's 3 questions there at the moment.
So that first question, can upward mobility mean staying at the same level but increase your knowledge and standing within a group? I would say so. I think if there's some type of growth aspect to it, that is upward mobility. If we had a participant who they worked at a grocery store and they wouldn't allow them to work at the deli counter because they were concerned about, I'm forgetting exactly what that was, but it was the idea of they removed this idea of autonomy, growth, self-determination, and so that was a loss. But even staying in one position, building skill sets, showing demonstration of that, I think would be that.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's not so much like that you have to move up within an organization, but that you have the opportunity to move up. And that pathway, it should be your own choice, whether or not you want to. I see the next question. Where should organizations begin in the context of the dignity of work? That's a great question. And I think that's what we were hoping to leave you all with, is just acknowledging this is such a huge system that we're all navigating in, but give you something small, tangible that maybe you could start doing tomorrow to focus on if you are one that helps people with placement in work context, that maybe you could focus on one component of that. Maybe it's acceptance of identity. Maybe it's providing opportunities for inclusion to promote belonging. I think those are just those little steps as far as like at the individual micro system that we can do before we knock on the doors of the big corporations and tell them they need to radically change everything. James, I'm going to give you this next
one. What's interesting is, do you see increased challenges ahead for people with disabilities? And it's kind of interesting because do we see increased challenges? we've always had challenges for people with disabilities, no matter, the current situation within the United States. And what I will say is what we don't know is that macro system. We talk about policies, we talk about protections, and there's so much unclarity as to how the current administration is going to be viewing and enforcing those policies and administration. And as we see, all of those impact the individual, it impacts the business. We're already seeing changes in business practices in DEI, some across major organizations. And so without saying this is specific about disabilities, I do think we're going to see changes, whether for the better or good. I'm not sure. I'm guessing not. But what I can say is we will continue to advocate. We hope people with disabilities will continue to advocate, and we hope that you continue to advocate because inclusion is not a bad word. Equity is not a bad word. We're here to create better outcomes for everybody and have a better society because we're all working together. That's the strength of who we are. That's the strength of all of us and our identities. And that's what our hope is.
Yeah. And I think the mantra I've been repeating to myself the last couple of weeks is just focus on what you can change in your own corner, in your own microsystem. And it comes down to those small things that we could just do for one another every day. And that's what we need to focus on.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Carly. Great way to end the presentation. I think obviously there's an increased focus on the US at the moment with the change of your administration, but I think, potentially what we've also seen is the ripple effect, which is happening across the globe at the moment, where we are starting to see changes, not just in the US, but we are starting to see the same type of rhetoric appearing in other countries as well. So I think I agree with you is that, we have to continue to advocate. We have to continue to keep our voice strong. I think there is always that propensity to go, it's just all too hard and the pendulum's switched the other way and, we feel helpless. But I think we have a responsibility as advocates and for people who work in this space, in this particular area, in supporting people with disabilities, to continue to have our voice heard. It may be that it's going to be a bit tougher over the next period of time. I think that's a given, but that's not a reason for us to stop, running series like we're running and for continuing to focus on this area. So, look, on behalf of the
and
career
thank you for giving us the opportunity to do this and to share with people all over.
No, thank you. I was just going to say thank you very much for giving of your time. I know it's evening for both of you, and Carly, you still got the kids up, and it's been a sick flu season as well, I hear in the US. So thank you for giving of your time. We've really appreciated it, and I think too, it's been really refreshing to hear new voices. Because we've not had you before, so new voices in this space, which I think is also really important for the work that we do about sharing other people's views on this area. So you'll be able to see in the comments, I'll send you the chat after this, but a lot of people have been really putting lots of positive comments in about your presentation as well. So thank you to both of you. Thank you to our attendees who joined us today from wherever you joined us across the globe. Thank you so much. As I said at the outset, if you're interested in either of the final 2 webinars in our Empowering Future series, just visit the Seeker website, click on the events tab, and you'll be able to follow links to register. James and Carly, have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.